Hello and welcome to another GiantSlayerTV how to play video. Today our analyst will be diving into how to play Mutant for patch 12.8. Mutant has gone from being a one-off composition to a staple of the meta. There's a few reasons for this, which we'll be covering prior to breaking down how to play the composition itself. Keep in mind as well that Mutant boards are usually different game to game due to the mutations. Because of that, there's not just one standard way to play them. We'll be covering those variations along with core items, augments, and a quick breakdown of each stage of the game. With all that said, let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT shows and tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our GiantSlayerTV social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. To begin with, let's talk about why Mutant is viable in the current and recent metas. There are a number of reasons that Mutant has shifted from being relatively uncommon to one of the most played boards. Balance and pace of the game are the two main factors worth talking about. Balance in the context of Mutants comes down to the viable carry champions. For most of set 6, that has either been Malzahar or Kai'Sa. Malzahar mostly gets relegated to the item carry in Synaptic Web, while Kai'Sa had her hand in a lot of cookie jars. But after a lot of changes throughout multiple patches, Kha'Zix has finally become a viable option for Mutants. This also opens up a lot more viable mutations like Cybernetic, Bio-Leeching, and even Adrenaline Rush. Now, those somewhat niche mutations have a viable carry to utilize the trait bonus. What this means for Mutants is now we have Synaptic Web for Malzahar, Voracious for Kai'Sa, and Kha'Zix is usually played with Voracious, Cybernetic, Bio-Leeching, or Voidborn. Kai'Sa is also played with a number of those, but her best is definitely Voracious. Point is, Mutant players have options. This is particularly good in the current and recent metas because flex play has been so dominant and Mutant having so many options makes it quite flexible. That brings up the other reason Mutant is doing well, the pace of the game. Not too many patches ago, the meta was setting around level 6 and 7 when a lot of compositions spiked in power. It was often tough to get safely into late game with level 8 and 9 simply because boards got strong way too fast. Synaptic Web Mutant was alright in that meta because of Malzahar, but the late game scaling was compromised heavily. But then the meta shifted and now the pace of the game is centered more around level 8, so it's much more likely to hit the late game boards. The Mutant tends to stabilize quite well at level 7 with Malzahar and Kha'Zix, so it naturally can scale well. All in all, the value of Mutant in the meta has gone up drastically over the course of the mid-set, and barring any huge balance changes that shift the meta, it's likely this synergy is here to stay. Let's continue now into the next section, core champions and traits for Mutant. The core for any Mutant board will vary game to game because it depends a lot on what the mutation is and what carry you're playing. The three carries for Mutant boards are Malzahar, Kha'Zix, and Kai'Sa. Malzahar tends to be a mid-game item holder for late-game AP carries like Victor, but he does do well as a supplementary damage dealer in general. Kha'Zix is strongest in the mid-game as he tends to get outscaled late-game, and of course Kai'Sa is all about the late-game. First off, let's talk about Kha'Zix. Kha'Zix can be played with a number of mutations, though the best are usually Cybernetic, Bio-Leeching, and Voidborn. Voracious is also decent, but it's better suited for Kai'Sa. For Kha'Zix board, the core champions are usually Kha'Zix, Malzahar, Rek'Sai, Kassadin, Kai'Sa, and Vi. From there you can add in Echo for Assassin, Victor for more late-game damage, or Silco for the Scholar buff and to buff Victor. There's a lot of ways that you can build a Kha'Zix board, but usually you want 5 mutants and then whatever else. Malzahar is primarily used with Synaptic Web, but even then, he's not always the primary carry. The best way to use Synaptic Web is with a mutant emblem, either on Ahri or later Victor. For this board, you also want to have 5 mutants that have the 40 mana reduction, meaning Malzahar, Kassadin, Cho'Gath, and Rek'Sai, and either Kai'Sa or an AP champion with mutant emblem. Additional champions for this board are usually Arcanist, though tossing in 5 costs is always fine, like Silco and Tahm Kench. Finally, Kai'Sa can do well with any mutation, but is by far the strongest option for Voracious since she can wipe out the enemy board on her own. This composition is the most unique because at its core, you really only need 3 mutants. Yes, more of the trait can do fine, but the goal is to buff Kai'Sa as much as possible while playing a lot of fodder champions. The core champions are Kassadin, Kha'Zix, Kai'Sa, Echo, Jinx, and Silco. From there you can add in a challenger, more frontline like Galio, or additional mutants. That covers the 3 most basic mutant boards, but keep in mind that you can always play flexibly. If you're committing to using the mutation of the game, all you need to do is make sure the mutant trait is active and then build your board around one of the 3 carries and you'll be good to go. With that, let's move on to the core items. We'll break this down carry to carry starting with Malzahar. Malzahar's best items are Blue Buff, Gunblade, and Morellonomicon. There's definitely room for other items, but those 3 are the best in slot, whether as the main carry for Synaptic or just to add in extra damage and utility in general. Outside of Synaptic, we don't recommend fully itemizing Malzahar because frontline items are often more important. Kha'Zix's best in slot items are Infinity Edge, Bloodthirster, and either RFC or Quicksilver. These items are the same regardless of the mutation, as it provides the most amount of damage and survivability. That said, when playing Bio-Leeching, you can take out Bloodthirster for extra damage or utility. Edge of Night is also an acceptable third item on Kha'Zix to help with de-aggroing enemy backliners. And finally, Kai'Sa's best in slot items are Gunblade, Edge of Night, and either Morellonomicon or Jeweled Gauntlet. These are specific for a Voracious board, as normally the two best items for Kai'Sa are Morellonomicon and Rageblade. The point of Gunblade and Edge of Night for Kai'Sa with Voracious is to keep her alive long enough for her allies to die, and then boom, she casts a second time and wipes the enemy board. That covers the three main carries for mutants. Frontline items are standard like Bramble, Redemption, Warmogs, and Dragon's Claw, and ideally go on Cho'Gath or another bruiser like Vi or Tahm Kench. The other important item to keep in mind specifically when playing Voracious is Zerat Portal. Ideally, you want 3 items for Kai'Sa, and the rest are Zerat Portals, as the summons it creates adds to the stacking effect of Voracious. Most of the time 1 is enough, but ideally 2 is best, and more than that is a bit overkill. That leaves us emblems. Mutant Emblem is one of the most used emblems in the meta because it adds a lot of flexibility. Not only is it good for boards like Synaptic Web, it also helps in general for hitting the higher tiers of the trait. And it often means you don't have to run Cho'Gath, which is a win-win in and of itself. Champions that use Mutant Emblem well are Ahri, Victor, Vi, Tahm Kench, and a number of other late-game champions or frontliners. As we said, it's quite flexible. Alright, up next, let's talk about Augments. We're not going to cover every single viable augment for mutants and instead focus on a few specific ones. In general, a lot of generically good augments do just fine for mutant boards, especially early game like Luden's Echo or econ augments like Rich Get Richer. First augments to talk about are the Mutant Heart and Crest augments. Ideally, you want the Crest because giving a mutant emblem is better than just having more of the trait unlocked, but both are good options if you're pursuing a mutant board. This can be forced early game, so make sure you're scouting to check what the mutation for the lobby is. Mutant Crown is less useful because there's a lot of better prismatic options, but if it's 4/6 and nothing else is helpful, then by all means take it. Along the same lines as that, Ancient Archives can be good, though it is a gamble as to whether or not you get the mutant emblem. Still, it's not a bad option. More generic options include Jeweled Lotus, Weak Spot, Knife's Edge, and Thrill. All of these can be useful for a mutant board depending on who your carry is. Getting slightly more specific, Phony Frontline is amazing for Voracious since it adds 2 extra units to the board. On the opposite side, Exiles is better for non-Voracious boards since it keeps the units alive too long, same with Shrug It Off. But both of those augments are useful in general since most mutant boards use Bruisers as the frontline. And to end with, Unstable Evolution has the potential to do well, but it is a risk. It's a risk because there's no control over what bonus the mutants get when upgraded. We recommend avoiding this augment unless you really want to roll the dice with a mutant board. All in all, you can get quite specific towards the augments you take with mutants. We recommend aiming for a well-rounded augment on 1/4 and only aim for specific augments related to mutants on 3/3 or 4/6 just in case you don't end up playing them in the lobby. To end with, let's quickly go over each stage of the game, starting with the early game. Mono priority off the first carousel depends a lot on what carry you're going to end up playing. Since you won't even know what the mutation is prior to picking, we recommend going for what you normally gravitate towards. If you're an AD player, then look for Bow, Glove, or Sword, and if you're an AP player, aim for Rod or Tear. At the end of the day, the safest option is either Chain Vest or Belt. Immediately after the opening carousel, we recommend scouting to find a Cassidon to see what the mutation of the game is. Once you have that knowledge, you can decide whether you want to aim for a mutant board or not. Keep in mind that you don't have to commit to playing a mutant board, but having the option open is never bad. There's not really any specific openers that are better or worse for mutants, though we do recommend aiming for a win streak to preserve health in the mid-game. Cassidon, Rek'Sai, and Malzahar are all fantastic early game units and can hold various items effectively, so you can always open with any or all 3 of those champions and likely do well. But overall, you can play the early game normally. Mid-game is where mutants get interesting because Malzahar stocks go up a lot in Stage 3 as an AP item holder. Hitting an early Kha'Zix can outright put you on a win streak if you have items for him and the mutant trait active. Point is, for Stage 3, you just want to find a stable board, which can be mutants, and work your way towards level 7. In Stage 4, after leveling to 7, it's time to decide, mutants or not. Always be sure to scout out and see who's likely to contest you. In general, Voracious is the most contested version of mutant, but it relies on hitting a Kai'Sa, so if multiple people are contesting you and you don't mind rolling the dice, then go for it. Kha'Zix is a much more stable variation, especially in Stage 4 if you can 2-star him. Malzahar begins to fizzle out in Stage 5, but early mid-game in Stage 4, he's quite good as long as you can 2-star him. Again, make sure you scout because Malzahar is used in quite a few compositions. Overall, the goal in Stage 4 is to piece together a stable mutant board and begin working your way towards level 8. With that, we can end in the late game. This is where each mutation plays out a bit differently. Synaptic Web tends to stay at level 7 and roll for Malzahar 3. Kha'Zix boards try to level to 9 after stabilizing and look for a better late game AD carry, and Kai'Sa boards aim to find Kai'Sa 1 and a bunch of 5-cost units. Regardless of which mutation, a lot of the endgame for mutants is decided on the 5-cost champions you're able to 2-star. Synaptic Web is a bit of an outlier when going for Malzahar 3, but oftentimes this variation has an emblem to give units like Ari or Victor. Overall, the 5-cost units to look for with late-game mutants are Victor, Silco, Kaisa, Tahm Kench, and Jinx. At the end of the day, mutant boards tend to spike the hardest in the mid-game and often lack in late-game scaling. Voracious Kaisa is an exception to this, but the best way to shore up the lack of scaling is to add in a few 5-cost units late game. Beyond that, focus on hitting your mid-game power spikes and you'll be on your way to top 4ing. That's all for today's video, folks. Mutants are a lot more fun now that more of the mutations are viable in the meta. In particular, the rise of Kha'Zix has added much-needed flexibility for this synergy. Let us know in the comment section below which composition you'd like us to cover in our next How to Play video. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Here's your Giant Slayer TFT videos.